Yeah, although, when I do this live presentation, I do it somewhat interactively. So I don't mind if you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask a quick question. That's absolutely fine. In fact, I kind of appreciate that. I want to check in with you guys and make sure that you're understanding everything that we're saying. So I'm just kind of go through this contract as if we were going to fill it out as a buyer. So I'm assuming that you guys are representing a buyer, because most often that is the way things are done when you're going to fill out a contract. If you're the listing agent, you're usually accepting an offer, and that's a whole different ball of wax there. So obviously, the first thing you're going to sign out is the buyer's name. So that is what you're going to do. You're just going to fill that out right there. Presumably, you know who your clients are, and that's what you put there. If you know that they're going to buy in the name of a trust or an LLC, you can put that there, but you can't mess this up. If it's down the line, that's perfectly fine. And then if you don't know who the sellers are, you can leave that blank because the listing agent will fill that in. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to describe the real estate. So if you know, let's say it's a single family home and you know what the acreage is, you can write that here where my screen is. If it's a condo, you can just leave this blank. You can also leave it blank now, and the seller's agent or the listing agent can fill it in, or the attorney can seek to have that filled in if it's important. And one of the times that this may be important, for example, is if you have a builder, a developer who needs a specific frontage or a specific amount of acreage so that they can build what they're presuming to build. Now, if that's the case, you and your attorney and the buyer have already kind of gotten together, and we know that we have to shore up our contract to make sure it has exactly, let's say, 125 feet of frontage. So we'll fill that out later in attorney review. Address. Now, this should be copied directly from the MLS. The address, the unit number if it's a condo, city, state, and county. Again, should have it right on the MLS. The permanent index number, the PIN number, that's the tax number, the tax identification number is another word for that. Again, should be on the MLS, so you can fill that out. And then we're going to identify what kind of real estate this is. And I see a lot of people get this wrong. We know what single family detached is, right? That's your standard single family home. Those PIN numbers are always going to end in 0000. That's a clue that you've got a single family detached home, and you would mark that. If it's a condo, a lot of people are marking multi-unit, but if you're just buying one condo, this is what you want to mark: single family attached, okay? And that's most often what folks are going to be doing when here in the city of Chicago. Single family attached. This multi-unit designation is if you have an investor that's buying a whole building, a 3-flat or a 6-flat or 7-unit apartment building. And so you won't come up on this as much unless that's your specific niche. And the next thing about is designated parking is included. This could be important for buyers of a condo. If you think you're getting a space, let's say you went to an open house and your buyers love this place, and the listing agent said to you, oh yeah, there's a parking spot downstairs, or they show you a parking spot, and you don't know, exactly what the number is or the location, whether it's deeded or assigned. If you don't know that, at least let your attorney know that we are looking for some kind of parking space. So I would identify at least, the number of parking spaces that you were told. I'd identify at least, I'd go ahead and at least identify that there's at least 1 or 2 spots, whatever you think that you're getting. And then during attorney review, the attorney can go say to the seller's attorney, hey, I want to know if this is a limited common element or if it's deeded or whatnot. Same thing, but less important for storage. But if you know that they've advertised that there's a storage space, check something, one space, and you can leave the rest blank, and we'll find out later in attorney review whether that's deeded or a limited common element. Does everybody understand the difference between deeded and assigned or common element? If not, somebody pipe up. Everybody's good?
Yeah, could you just briefly explain it?
Sure. So deeded means you own it. Like you get deeded the apartment building itself or your condo itself, but you can also be deeded a parking spot. So you would have two different PIN numbers. And if you have a deeded parking spot, that's something that you own that's separate and apart from your condo. It's actually something that you can sell. And a lot of times you'll see parking spaces for sale that aren't necessarily attached to a condo. So that's important to know. That can certainly change the value of your contract if you think it's coming with a parking spot or not, and whether that spot is deeded or not. So if you have clients and you've identified a condo that comes with a deeded parking spot, I would go ahead, or if that's what you think it is, you may not know what the PIN number or all that stuff is, but we definitely want to note that. And we definitely would want to check deeded in that case, because that has value. Not that a limited common element doesn't have value, but that just means that there's generalized parking and you get to use it while you own a condo in this building. Okay, that and assigned space are very similar. Okay, and it's similar for storage. Storage is almost never deeded, but it's often assigned and it's part of a limited common element. So when we're talking about condos specifically, common elements are hallways and the stuff that you share with other people. Limited common elements are part of the building as a whole, but they're assigned specifically just for your use. So sometimes porches, rooftop decks could be a limited common element. All right, unless there's any questions, I'm going to move on to these fixtures. This is, people kind of overlook this, but it's pretty important. So while you're in the condo, or let's say while you're in the house or whatever it is that your people are buying, if your folks believe that there's a garbage disposal, you need to check garbage disposal. Obviously, we hope it comes with a refrigerator and a stove and all that good stuff. But if you think there are other things, washer, dryer, you want to check everything that your folks believe that they're getting. A lot of this will come from the MLS. It should be indicated on the MLS. But there are other things. Let's say your folks, there's a fireplace and they want the screen because maybe you discussed it while you're going, walking through before you made your contract. Oh, does that screen come with the fireplace? And if the listing agent says yes, you want to click it here, or you may not necessarily get it. Okay. Same thing, be super important about this. Wall-mounted TV brackets. I've had so many situations where sellers just leave and pull the whole darn thing off the wall and leave a gaping hole. And it was never discussed until we got to closing and they did their final walkthrough and they say, hey, wait a minute, we thought you were at least leaving the bracket. Okay, so if these are things that are going to be important to your client, it's important to think of them up front at this process, okay? If this is checked, for example, and we get to that closing and it's gone, then I can say, okay, seller, now that this is gone, not only were you required to leave it for us because it was on our contract, but you've also left us a hole. So now you're going to have to pay us some money to get that hole fixed and to get it, to buy a new bracket and money to have that bracket installed. So that's what a little check mark can do for you. Okay. Other items included at no value. So let's say there is porch furniture or a grill or a couch. Oftentimes it is the chandelier. So if you want these things that are not necessarily going to stay, then you actually have to indicate here. This is where you would do it. This isn't the place where if your clients are trying to negotiate the sale of furniture or to buy some furniture from some people, this is not the place to do it. That we do outside of the contract because we don't want a lender getting involved with like, should we lower the appraisal because they've got $10,000 worth of furniture in there? So that's where you'd put that. And then anything not included. So if you're a listing agent and you know that your sellers are absolutely in love with an antique chandelier that they had installed and they are taking that with them, even if the selling agent didn't put that here, this is where you're going to write this down. So it's clear to everybody. We're taking this when we go, and we're not going to get to the end of our, contingency periods and get to closing and then have an argument about this gaping hole in the wall. We've indicated it clearly right here, what's not going to be left with the apartment. Okay. I've also seen this used by buyers. If there are built-in bookshelves that they want removed, I've had them say items not included. Built-in bookshelves in the living room, they wanted those removed, so they put those there. Okay. Here is a little thing that almost nobody uses, but let's say this is an as-is contract, or let's say this is a contract, not necessarily as is, but the seller says, listen, the jacuzzi tub doesn't work. It's almost always the jacuzzi tub that doesn't work. We use it as a soaking tub. They don't make jacuzzi parts anymore, so we're not going to get that fixed. And everyone knows that going in. The seller can say right here, all fixture systems, everything that we've indicated up here is going to be in good working order, except the jacuzzi tub. All right. And then if the sellers agreed to supply a home warranty, you can check this here. If you don't check it here, it's okay. We can always add it later. We can add it in that paragraph 32. But here's where you do it if it's part of the agreed on, part of the deal that you've already agreed on. Okay. Any questions so far? What I want to make sure that everybody is aware is that it's really, really hard to mess up this contract because we're so lucky that we have these attorney review period. So almost anything that you do on this contract, if it's not quite right or if it needs souping up, we can fix it during attorney review. So you should have that confidence going in. You really can't mess this up, okay? Purchase sales price, this is what you're offering. This may get crossed out and redone over here when the seller, if they come back with a different offer. But this is where you put the purchase sales price. This is what your offer is, okay? If you have a buyer who knows that they're going to be cash poor and they need some closing cost money and they want to soup up their offer. So let's say they want to pay $350,000 for this condo in Lakeview. But they're going to need a little bit of money. And you look at the value of this condo and think it can support about a 355, 360 appraisal. You can always soup up your numbers here and write 355 here and then ask for a credit of $5,000 back. And that way you can help a kind of a cash poor buyer take advantage of some of these great rates, but also get some closing costs. It's sort of the way to get it tied into their mortgage, okay? Earnest money. So the line here we're talking about is the initial earnest money. This is I'm here to make a deal money. Usually it's about $1,000. If we're talking about $1 million property, maybe it's $5,000. This is the one that you turn in with the contract saying, we mean business, okay? And then the final additional earnest money, you can write a money amount here, or you can write a percentage of the purchase sales price. And that will be tendered by, and usually people write 2 days after AI. And that's not code, it just means 2 days after the attorney review period ends. AI is short for attorney inspection. So if you see that somewhere, it's how everybody talks about the attorney and inspection review periods. So if you want to write 2 days or 3 days after AI, you can do this here. I also wanted you to take notice that if you're used to the car contract, this is treated a little bit differently. So you have your initial earnest money, that's the same. Additional earnest money in the car contract, it states additional earnest money will be up to. So it's already assumes this money in it. This is an extra added amount of money. So if you want to put 10% down total, if your buyers want to put 10% down total and they put 1% down here, they only want to do an additional 9% here. They don't want to put the total amount here, or they're going to actually end up putting down 11%. Any questions on this first page so far? Anything that I didn't go over that anybody wants to know about? We all good? Wish I could see your little faces so I know everybody's getting it. All right. And then, as you're filling out this contract, your buyers are going to initial. If you've got one buyer, just one initial. You've got 2 buyers or more, make enough room for all of your buyers to initial. And then the sellers are going to do the same thing when it's their turn to work on this contract. Moving on to page 2. So let's see. If the listing agent, which is generally what's happening, is holding the earnest money, you can check that's going to be held at the seller's brokerage. If you're holding the money as the buyer, or sometimes you find an agency that doesn't hold earnest money, and you can always ask the attorney to hold it in their escrow account. Most attorneys like myself keep an escrow account for various reasons, but are also willing to hold earnest money if you need it. And there's generally no fee for that. So some brokerages will charge a fee for being the escrowee, but attorneys are nice to have an alternative if you want to do that. All right. So I'm going to skip over to closing. This is your closing date. This is your preferred closing date. Again, you can write, you want to close at the end of the month. The seller may come in and say, oh, I need a month and 2 weeks. Be wary, though, that you need, if your clients are getting a loan, you need to have had a conversation with the lender before you do this part. Say, how long do you need? Rates are great right now. There's a ton of people buying. There's a ton of people refinancing. And what normally takes 30 days is sometimes taking 45 days for our premier lenders these days. So if you know your lender is going to need 45 days, make sure you give yourself 45 days here. Okay?
Real quick, Jennifer, sorry. I see a question in the chat about paragraph 4 and 4A. Did that question get answered, Nita, or did you have further questions?
I'm trying to see where I could see the chat. Oh, here's the chat. Okay. Let me look real quick.
That was the earnest money, so I'm not sure if it got. Oh, she needs it one more time. No problem.
Okay, the earnest money. Let me go back to it. Doop, 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 doop. Okay, so earnest money. So this first one is just the money that you're handing in with the contract. We mean business. You're going to put it's usually $1,000. Tender to the escrowee on or before, usually 0. So sometimes it's 1 day, or it's usually given on the same day as that you're tendering this offer. So the first earnest money check goes with the offer. The second one that we're talking about means after we've got a contract, you guys have made an offer, the sellers have countered, and you have agreed on all of the terms of this contract before attorneys get our muddy little hands on it. That's when after AI. So once we have a final contract, that's when the balance of additional earnest money is going to be due. Okay. So this first one comes without any hooks attached. The second one, you're going to, your buyer should have an idea of how much cash they're willing to put up as a placeholder. This is money that goes to the seller to say, we have this contract together, and I'm asking you to take your condo or your house off the market and enter into this contract with me. And this money is there to protect you if things go south. It's there, it's kind of on hold, up for grabs. So you want to put a significant amount of money here. And I've seen this negotiated back and forth. The buyers maybe want to put additional $5,000 down, and the seller said we want at least 10% of the purchase sales price. So you can kind of argue that back and forth. And then the timing of that, it doesn't have to happen once you have all the signatures on the contract. You're going to have this tendered, this balance by, and usually people write 2 days. So within 2 days of AI, I wanted to write that in there, but my text is. Anyway, you get what I mean. Have you seen that written within 2 days of AI? AI meaning attorney and inspection period. We're going to go over that later in the contract. But just because you've got the terms hashed out on this contract and the buyers have signed and the sellers have signed, we don't have a final contract in Illinois until the attorneys have gotten a chance to kind of review it and make proposed changes. And we don't do that until you've had an inspection and we've maybe asked for some repairs or some credits based on what that happens. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about after all the dust has settled, that the attorneys have reviewed it, they've sent letters back and forth, and then they'll send you a note saying, we have a final contract. And that's when earnest money will then be due 2 business days thereafter, or 3 business days thereafter, whatever you've indicated here. And I'm going to go over to the chat and see. Can I explain the credit at closing? Okay. Okay. Yeah, let's go back over the credit at closing. So credit at closing, this just means that you're asking the seller to give the buyer a credit, not for any repairs, just because you need a credit, because your buyer needs a little bit of cash. Maybe they know from their lender that they can afford to buy something. Let's use our number as $350,000. They can afford that. They're only going to put 5% down. So they know how much cash they have to come out with. And they know that they're going to be a little bit cash poor. So they can ask the seller to give them a credit here. And oftentimes, it's obviously very related to your purchase sales price. So if the purchase sales price, it's basically a net out for the seller, but it means a lot to a buyer. So if you're going to offer $350,000, but you need $5,000 of closing cost money as a buyer to cover all those costs at closing right up front, then you can raise the purchase price to $355,000 and ask for $5,000 credit back. I'm going to check in on the meeting notes. Does that sort of, Celeste, does that sort of explain how we use that? Okay, good. She said, thank you. All right, great. So we've talked about the closing. Closing shall be on. We're going to put our proposed date there. And possession, we're going to assume here, there's nothing to do here. It just says that when we close and the money gets transferred, the keys get transferred, and that's your normal sale, that the sellers don't own it anymore after the closing date. If it's going to be something different, there's a way to kind of indicate that later in paragraph 35. Okay. Financing. So this is biggie, and this one it can get sort of confusing for people. Again, you can't really mess this up because we can always go back and change it during attorney review. But the whole purpose for this financing contingency, or oftentimes we'll call it a mortgage contingency, is to protect your buyer. Your buyers know that they can't afford to pay cash for this condo, and they know they're going to need to borrow at least X amount of dollars or a certain percentage of the purchase sales price. So that's what this is for. It's not to lock them in. It's not to lock them in saying you have to get this rate at 3%, even though rates have gone down, or you have to borrow a certain amount. This is solely for your buyer's protection. Because if they can't, let's say you check loan contingency, yes, we've initialed, we need this loan contingency. I'm determined to get this loan thing, this thing working for me. Bear with me for a second. Aha. All right. So let's say we know we need a loan contingency. You're going to do, even if your folks eventually get an adjustable rate mortgage, right? Or they, they end up getting a VA loan, or they say they're going to need a VA loan. They end up getting a conventional loan. It doesn't matter. We don't have to update this. This is for your buyer's protection. So if they know they need to borrow 85%, of the purchase sales price, you can put that there, right? And that way, if for some reason they don't qualify for an 85% loan at 3%, if they don't qualify, they can get out of this contract. They can walk away, they can get their earnest money back, no problem. That's the whole purpose for the loan contingency, not to let the seller in on their business about how much they're borrowing or anything. This is solely for the ability to walk away if they can't get this loan. Does everybody understand that? It's super important because this is just for your buyer's protection. So because it's for your buyer's protection, if you know that they're trying to get an FHA or a VA loan, I would go ahead and check those little boxes, right? Because it's pretty hard sometimes to get a VA loan. And if they can't get a VA loan, then you want to make sure that they can get out of this contract, right? Normally the hardest loan to get is a fixed conventional loan, right? So I often say, go ahead and if you know they're not trying to get a weird FHA or a VA or any of those things, go ahead and just check fixed conventional. And then say they need to borrow at least 85% of the purchase sales price or whatever your people tell you. Maybe they need to borrow 90%. Maybe they need to borrow whatever it is. This is the conversation you're having with the lender too. And at least 3%, or if they know they want to do better, you can put 2.75 if you're kind of up on the rates. But put something down here. This is normally a 30-year mortgage, right? So these are the kind of things you're filling out just to say, at least we're protected. And at the very least, what it does is tell your attorney, okay, we've got a mortgage contingency. So I see you've made an attempt to do something here. I'm going to go back in and shore it up during attorney review. See how easy it is? Like even if you completely flub this, as long as I've got initials here on loan contingency and the sellers have initials saying, okay, we recognize that you have a mortgage contingency, it really doesn't matter what you do here because I can fix it. Everybody got that? What if they have a VA approval letter, says Celeste? Great, then go ahead and check VA. And just because they have a VA approval letter doesn't mean the building is certified for VA. And it doesn't mean that they can actually get a VA loan. So that's a great question. If they know they want to qualify for a VA loan, and let's say they can't qualify or the building itself is not VA approved, which is a thing, believe it or not, here, there has to be a clause about allowing VA loans. then they can get out of this contract. And that's the whole purpose of this financing contingency, is to let them get out if they can't get the terms that they need to make this purchase make sense for them. Okay. So yeah, check what you know, do your best, and you can't mess it up. Okay. Again, here, there's other ways. Okay, so you can buy with cash, you can buy with a mortgage, and you can buy cash with a mortgage allowed. So obviously, if you know you need a mortgage, you're going to do this loan contingency A. If let's say your buyers have cash and they absolutely want to win this deal, there's multiple offer situation. I've seen people draw a whole line through financing contingency to make those sellers notice this contract, and then you would sign cash. I'm going to pay you cash, which means I can close in a couple of weeks. There's going to be no problem. We don't need to get a bunch of stuff for my lender. We're going to try to make our attorneys happy, but it's so much easier if you've got cash. Cash talks, right? And then the other option that you can do is say, yeah, I don't necessarily have to have financing contingency, but I want the option. So let's say, rates are so good right now, and let's say your buyers can afford to pay cash if a mortgage doesn't, pan out for them, but the seller still says a mortgage is allowed. Cash transaction mortgage is allowed. So, we've got 30 days until closing, and the buyers are like, rates are like 2.75 or 2.5%. They're ridiculous. We could pay cash, but we want to look into the opportunity to have a mortgage. They don't get any financing contingency. So if they can't get a mortgage, they can't back out of this contract. They still have to pay cash. But this is like your second level of getting a seller's attention. They can pay cash, but they don't have to. They cannot. The seller will allow them to get a mortgage as long as it doesn't prevent closing. Okay. Any questions about that? Can you click on more than one type of loan? Says Sarah. So we're back to the finance contingency. You could, of course you could, if it makes sense. So you can say it's usually these are mutually exclusive. You either have a VA loan or an FHA loan. You rarely have one or the other, have both, but it could be certainly a fixed rate VHA loan. It could be adjustable rate, these kind of things. So normally your buyer, when they have that pre-qual letter, they're going to know what they're looking for. So you'll have some indication on what to check there. All right. All right. So you went over cash with mortgage allowed. Statutory disclosures. I would wait because oftentimes the listing agent is going to give you these pamphlets and all this stuff after you've got a signed contract. So you can let the seller come in here and check, because you guys know your brokerage is going to want to see this as part of your package. Hey, guys, I'm going to take a break for half a second because I've got a noisy parakeet and I'm going to move her. Hang on. Sorry about that. I'm back. This is the fun of working at home, right? All right. So let me check our little meeting minutes. Any notes? We don't typically hold EM for our sellers. I'm not sure what that was about, but you let me know if you have any other questions. All right, prorations. So we prorate a couple of things in Chicago. One of the things, the biggest thing that can be confusing is the proration of real estate taxes. So just to kind of give you my short little thing on how taxes are made here in Chicago, they're done in arrears. You may have heard that before, and that's just a fancy word for saying a year late. So right now in 2020, we're paying the 2019 tax bill as homeowners. We're talking about property taxes. Next year in 2021, whoever owns the property in 2021 as of January 1st will pay the full 2020 bill. So let's say you're making an offer today and you know that your new buyers are going to have to pay this 2020 bill next year. We want to make sure that it's fair, that the sellers at closing will prorate an amount for the tax bill for the amount of time that they've owned the property. So from January 1 of 2020 up and through the closing date. Does everybody understand how that works? Why we do it that way? All right. And because we don't know what the 2020 tax bill will be, and we assume that it's going to go up because it goes up incrementally every year. And then every 3 years, we have a reassessment year and it goes up often substantially. So this is not a reassessment year. This is just a regular old year, but we know that the multiplier, that we know that those taxes are going to go up at least a little bit. So what we often put here is either 105%. So it's either 105 to 110% in that little box there. That is the standard. And on a reproration year, oftentimes we'll negotiate that at 110, 115%. And if we know what the tax proration has gone up, the amount that it's gone up, then we'll do it by the actual amount of the prorations. A lot of realtors are sort of not sure about this, so they don't know what to put in there. They don't want to kind of argue at this at the beginning. So sometimes they will write TBD right here. And that's fine too. That just means that during attorney review, the attorneys can hash that out. I'm fine with that. If you know though that it's a reassessment year, or you know that there are high taxes here that you want it to be taken care of, and you want to get the best for your client right off the bat, it's part of what you're looking for. Or let's say you got a little bit beat up over the price by the seller, you can go ahead and give yourself 110% there. Any of those options is good. Even if you leave it blank, most lawyers will catch that and fix it during attorney review. But that's the whole reason for the proration. Any questions about the tax proration? All right. And then if it's a condominium, you should be writing what we think the condo fees are. That should come off the MLS. So if it's $300 per month, and you most likely don't know anything about what the master policy, this master umbrella association fees are what the condo pays for insurance for the whole building. Nobody ever knows that. So you can feel perfectly fine to leave that blank. But you should, let's say, and I've had this come up where a listing attorney casually asked their buyer, what do you pay for your HOA fees? And he said, oh, it's like $525. So that's what she put there per month. And then, come to find out, everybody signs the contract, we get through AI, and then those condo documents start to flow in, and we come to find out that it's actually $1,000 per month, which is a big deal difference, especially, for someone who's on a budget. An extra $500, that's like a car payment. That's ridiculous. So, it killed the contract right then and there. So I would copy it off the MLS, but also just take note, if you're a listing agent, you could really hurt yourself by just taking people's word for it. Make sure you check on that. Or if you write something down, make your client check on that. It's their duty even though you're filling out this contract, to look this over and to make sure it's correct. Check in and see if there's any comments. Nope, we're doing good. All right. And then the third page is really the last page that we really have to get involved in a multi-board contract. Everything else, I don't want to say the word fluff, but I will say the word fluff. Everything else is there sort of if you need it. We're going to kind of go over it and show you some of the situations where you might need to use it. But if you can master up through page 4 or page 3, really of filling things out, you're golden, right? So that's where I really want to focus. I'm going to stay after, I'm going to be available. I'm going to make sure you guys really feel good about filling out pages 1 through 3, okay? And then now let's just go over and see what else is in this contract. It really is just a bunch of legal terms that happens in like what if scenarios. But I will show you a couple of things that are important. So I keep telling you that you can't mess this up, and here's why. Within 5 business days after the acceptance date, after the seller has agreed and said, oh yeah, I take this offer, we accept it, your attorney gets 5 business days to look this over and also make some changes. So we can either just say, okay, I accept this contract as is. Let's say within those 5 days, your folks say, nope, we don't, this is not the one for us. We either found something else, or we, God forbid, just lost a job and can't afford it anymore. Or we had an inspection done and we found out the whole place is made out of asbestos with extra mold topping on it. And we don't want to buy this unit. Within that 5 days, I can just terminate and I don't even have to give any reason why. And then they get their earnest money back and we all move along, okay? This is most often what happens is that the attorneys propose modifications to this contract. And that's where I go in and I shore up. Let's say we have a TBD on our tax prorations, or let's say there was something about the earnest money that I want to correct, or let's say the financing contingency wasn't completely hashed out or wasn't filled out to the best effect for our client. I can go in and make those changes, right? The other thing, you'll often see attorneys have a letter that's 3 or 4 pages long. I have a standard multi-board letter because even though this is a really good contract, it doesn't necessarily match up with Illinois law. So the people who create this contract are experts at what they do. They're expert at creating contracts, but they don't necessarily look and say, well, Illinois says specifically this in relation to these kinds of cases. So as an attorney, I have to be up on case law. And so I have a lot of objections or changes to the contract. It really just changes legal language or adds additional language to protect my client, no matter who that is. Most oftentimes, I'm sending a letter on behalf of the buyer. Oftentimes, if I look at this contract and I see, oh, this doesn't quite protect my seller well enough, I'll send a letter that has proposed modifications that protect my seller. And that goes back and forth. Me and the other attorney will go back and forth a few times. We hash down our language. It seems really annoying to you guys because you're like, you know, and also, why do you guys even care that there's a comma here and that? Because it just makes me happy because I'm a big old legal nerd and this is what I do. But it can be important. It's all for the protection of our clients. So that's what's happening. We're going to send this letter and hash it out. Oftentimes, that letter will come at the same time as the professional inspection. So during those 5 business days, I'm writing my little letter up. And meanwhile, your clients are also having an inspection done on the property. And you'll notice, where is it in here? It's on the next page, that they get 5 business days to request repairs. And that's not an accident, that's on purpose. That jibes up with the attorney review period. That's why we call it the AI period, attorney review and inspection period. So you've got 5 days to make proposed changes to the language of the contract and 5 business days to have an inspection and make repair requests. So that's all for the same reason. And just because this is in bold print here, 5 business days, doesn't mean, let's say it's July and you can't get a property inspector out there in a week to save your life. You can scratch through that and write in 7 days or 10 days or whatever it is you need. You can always do that on any aspect of the contract. You can change it to meet your needs, okay? And let's say you just have 5 days on there, but then you go to schedule your inspection and it just doesn't work out. You're going to blow your inspection period. Call your attorney and we'll get an extension. We grant these things amongst ourselves all the time. The nice thing about property law is that it's a pretty congenial area. It's a nice place to work. It's a nice living to make because it's not aggressive. We're not counter. Just because I represent the seller and you represent the buyer, we're both trying to get to the same place, and that's closing and make everybody happy. So extensions are routinely granted unless there's a really good reason not to grant an extension. We do that stuff all the time. I see John. We're gonna talk about what if you have to sell a property in order to buy this property. We're going to get to that. That's one of those contingencies later in the contract that are important, and it's great to have in this contract. I promise I'll get there for you. All right. So that's attorney review, inspection review. Everybody understands what's happening during AI, or attorney and inspection review. And then a lot of this stuff is just nothing that you need to do, nothing that we need to worry about. It has to be an insurable property. If it's in a flood zone, what do we do then? What do we do if it's in a condominium? Well, we all kind of know you have to provide condo documents. The buyer needs to get a good look at the condo to see if it's in good shape. Have they been making repairs? Do they have enough money in reserves if something goes wrong in the future? Illinois has an act that says you have to supply all of these documents and minutes and budgets and all kinds of good stuff to the buyer so that they can make an educated opinion. And you get 5 days to look at those documents. And that doesn't necessarily coincide with attorney review. You may get those documents early in the process, but you might not. And everybody knows that it's not because the seller's dragging their feet. It's just because oftentimes you're dealing with a condominium association or property manager, and you don't have the ability to get those documents right away. So you make your request, and once those are received, the buyer gets 5 business days to look those over and make sure they're okay. And then if they don't like them, let's say the building is just in awful shape and the reserves are next to nothing, and the buyer says, you know what, I don't want to take on this building. Even if we're out of attorney review, this section says that we can get out of this contract because the condominium itself is not in good shape, okay? So I'm not going to go over all this stuff because this is all just really information to the title company, to the attorneys about what needs to take place in order to get this to closing. And it's nothing that you need to fill out as a realtor trying to make a contract, all right? You're going to, as the selling agent, when you get this offer back, you want the seller you're going to have your buyers pre-initial these things, but you're going to want the seller to state that there are hopefully no improvements to the real estate which are not included in the most recent tax assessment. What they're talking about there is if your seller built a garage mahal, as I like to call it. So the tax assessor is going to find out about it. They're going to go through the alley and see, oh, hey, you've got a whole new floor on here and a giant deck. We're going to reassess your taxes and bump it up a bit. You should be disclosing that if that's what your seller has done. We need to take that into consideration. Okay. So you're just going to have your seller initial and check all the appropriate boxes here, okay? I'm skipping a lot of this. Again, nothing for you to do here other than initial on the boxes below. And then here we get into the following number of paragraphs are part of this contract only if initialed by the parties. So I have seen a lot of people initial every single one of these just thinking they had to. They saw a box and they felt like they need to fill it. But you're really only doing this if it applies to our particular purchase, okay? If you are a dual agent, which we highly discourage, but if you're acting as a dual agent, that's something that everybody in the transaction, buyers and sellers, need to sign off on, okay? Here, John, is what you were asking me. A lot of times, the buyer needs to sell their house before they can afford to buy a new house. And if that is the case, this contract is fantastic for making sure that everybody is aware of exactly what is going on with the buyer's other real estate that needs to be sold. So if you want to make this contract contingent on the fact that your buyer can't buy this without selling that other piece of property first, then you're going to initial this box right here, okay? Everybody understand what are contingencies for? We went over this. Contingencies are so you can get out of this contract if this thing that we're looking for doesn't happen. So if we can't get a mortgage, and then we can get out of the contract. If we don't like the condo documents, there's a contingency, we can get out of the contract. If the property doesn't appraise, we can get out of the contract. If we are unable to sell our real estate, we can either get out of this contract or adjust the terms of this contract until we can sell. So that's what this is about. If you have a buyer who has a home, but they don't need to sell it in order to buy this other piece of real estate, they just would really like to, this is a conversation you have to have with them. And you have to take a hard look at what the property that they're buying. Are there multiple offers, right? Is this a hot ticket piece of property that you know is the sellers in this seller's market? They're not going to want to take a contract that necessarily has this contingency. So that's something you need to discuss very importantly with your buyer before they do this. So if you are clicking this, it means you have a buyer who needs to sell their own property that they currently own. So as we look now into identifying more information, we're talking about their current property that they own. So you would put the address of the current property that they live in or own. And then we check these items. So they either have or haven't entered into a contract to sell this property here, right? If they have already entered into a contract, hopefully that's the case, then, so if buyer has entered into a contract, then they want additional information about that contract here. If they have not entered into a contract, you don't need to do anything here because it doesn't apply. Everybody understand that? Has, this matches. Has and has. It matches, okay? So let's assume they have entered into a contract to sell their own other property. Then they want to know about that contract. So this other contract that hopefully you're involved with and well, does that contract have a mortgage contingency? Maybe. Is that contract subject to a real estate contingency? That gets really meta here, right? Do those buyers have to be sellers in their own property? Is this a whole, row of dominoes where if one sale falls down, this whole deal breaks down, from the start? Hopefully not. And is that subject to a closing contingency? So we're going to talk about that. We haven't addressed that here yet. But there's a difference between real estate sale contingency and a closing contingency. It's very minor, but you will know because you'll be able to look at your buyer's other contract. Okay, so you'll know that information. So if they have entered into a contract, which we assume they have, then they most likely have also publicly listed this for sale, right? If they have not entered into a contract, they at least tell your seller, yes, they've listed it for sale. And if they haven't, by gosh, you go get that listing, right? So even if they haven't got a contract on their house, they've at least got it listed, okay? If it's not publicly listed for sale, then they're gonna list it for sale. Or they don't. This would be terrible. How can you tell, look at this one, number B. How can you say to a seller, I want my contract to buy your house contingent upon me selling my property first, but I never intend to list this for sale? Let's just get that out of our minds. Nobody in their right mind would ever agree to that. You're going to get that listing if that's the case. So that almost will never happen. So you either have it in a contract. If you haven't had it in a contract, then number 3, you at least have it listed. And if it's not listed, hopefully it will be listed today because you're going to get that listing, okay? Now we get into the contingencies based on the sale and or closing. So if this is your situation and you're selling real estate to be able to buy this house, we're not done yet. We're going to look at if you already have a contract for the sale of your property, it's in full force and effect as of, and this is the date that you entered into, that you're going into this contract. So I would put today's date here. So as of today, it's in full force of effect, okay? Meaning that contract hasn't been terminated. They may still be an AAI, but as far as you know, you've got a contract for the sale of your property, okay? So that's going to be a date. And this is important information to know and put down because you want to make this contract attractive to the seller, okay? If they've entered into a contract and that contract is in full force and effect, yes. This contract is contingent upon buyer closing on this contract on or before. And in this case, I would put the closing date of this contract working on right here. I'm getting little noises. I'm wondering if there's questions here. Everybody up to speed so far? So you want to make sure that the contract that for the sale of your property closes on or before this contract's closing date. So in this box, whatever you wrote as your closing date, that's what you're going to write here. Everybody get that? Because obviously we have to sell in order to be able to buy, okay? And then if for any reason that contract is terminated, this provision says, all right, if I can't sell my house, you can't make me buy this one, okay? Now, the seller has certain rights. So if you're the selling agent and you have a buyer who needs to sell their house, I would fill up to there and then stop. If you're a listing agent and you see that someone is filling out this contract saying they've got to sell their property before they can buy yours, you want to make sure that you pick up right where they left off right here with the seller's rights. And so what this is that you can keep this listed as contingent on the MLS, and other people can still have the right to look at this property. And if you get a backup offer, you can kick out this contract right here. You can give a 48-hour notice. Normally people write 48 hours in this little box right here. Or 72 hours, where you say to this buyer, so you can't just take another contract. Let's say you get a better offer that doesn't have a home sale contingency and it's cash and it's for $20,000 more. Fantastic. You can't just be like, all right, cool. You have to tell those new buyers, all right, but I've got a contract, it's contingent. I'm going to give those buyers 48 hours to fish or cut bait, basically. So even if you haven't sold your house, you either waive the contingency about selling your house if you want to go forward with this contract, or else you get kicked out. Does everybody understand what the kick out contingency is? All right, so that's important. I know it's not customary for people to show properties that are contingent here, which is crazy, and we have a competitive market, especially now. A lot of contracts have these weird provisions, and and sellers have the right to kick out these contracts. So I would encourage agents, if there's a perfect property, don't be discouraged from showing it to your buyers just because it's contingent on the MLS. Oftentimes those sellers are desperate to find another offer because they're locked into a contract, or perhaps the buyer can't sell their own real estate and they've just been going round and round, but they do have a kickout. So keep that in mind, okay? In New York, kickouts happen on the daily, right? So you can certainly think about that and use that to your advantage, right? So that is the home sale contingency, as we call it, and all the variations on that. Again, really hard to mess up. The one good reason to try to get this right is so that you make the best offer possible and you get that seller to say, okay, I'll agree to this. So you want to just be informed when you do this to make the best offer possible, okay? But you can't mess it up. And it can be fixed like anything else during attorney review. All right. Again, all of these things are part of this. They fall under this line. The following numbered paragraphs are part of this contract only if initialed by the parties. So any of these other things that you're going to see here on the rest of this contract are only if they apply. If your seller agrees to buy a home warranty, you're going to initial here. If your clients are strange and they want a termite inspection, they can initial that here. If you need post-closing possession, you can initial here and let the attorneys work it out. I know we're kind of running over on time, but this is the one that most often is used, as is. We're making a really great contract. We've seen the condition, and we're willing to take it as is. We know my clients are going to rehab it anyway, so they don't care if like the cabinets are falling apart. We're going to make this an as-is contract. Doesn't mean you can't walk away if the inspection issues show that the whole place is falling apart. You can still do so, but that's what as-is for. And then we all know how to sign at the end. Date of the offer, you're going to put your buyer's signature and the best information that you have. If you know the attorney, great. If you know the mortgage company, great. But it's not necessary to bind this contract. All you need is the date and the signature. All right. And then the date of acceptance. Once the seller signs that date of acceptance, that is the date that all these other timelines that we've been talking about go. So 5 business days for attorney review, 2 business days to get earnest money in. It's all based on that acceptance date. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if anybody has any questions for me. Oh, so Maha has a great question. Can they force the buyer to match the new offer if it's higher? No. Once you're locked into a contract, you're locked into that contract. You can take a backup offer for the higher amount, and you can try to kick out those buyers if they have a home sale contingency. But after you have a final contract, you can't go back to these buyers and say, oh, we just got a backup contract and we want you to meet that or make a higher offer. So that's important. Here I am. Anybody else with any questions? I want to make sure that you know what my email is and my phone number, because if you are writing a contract and you're still sorry, I didn't mean to. If you're writing a contract and you have questions, or you want to you want an attorney to go over this to see if you've done this correctly, or you want help filling this out, call me. This is what I do, even if it's not my deal, even if your buyers have an attorney that they already want to work with, but you personally want a little help, or you feel like you need some extra, another set of eyes looking this over. That's what I'm here for you. And eventually I'll earn your business. So I love these mentoring opportunities. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this today. Please feel free to call me. I'm going to write my email address. Email me if you have questions or just to introduce yourself. I've got a whole bunch of resources that I offer to folks, and it's all free, and it's my job to make you better at your jobs and makes the world go round. So that's it for me, Rachel. If you want to hop in here, if there's anything else you want to do to finish out this meeting. Sorry, we went over a little bit. Nita, you're welcome so much. All right, folks, I think we may just be done. I think maybe Rachel's busy, but please do feel free to reach out. Shoot me a little email if you have additional questions, just to say hello, get to know me, and we can just talk about how to further your practice. I love doing that. I've been doing this for 23 years. I love what I do. So I'm going to sign off now, and it was lovely seeing you guys.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Oh, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. All right, folks, please do reach out. Just say hi. I'm bored sitting here in my house by myself. I know most of us got into this business because we like people. So reach out, say hi, and let's get to know each other. Bye.
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you, everybody. I'll include this in our Friday roundup email. So have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay safe.
Thank you.